Hello and welcome to Chapter 7, The Flow of Food, Service. Let's start by talking about holding foods. Food that is being held for service is at risk for time temperature abuse and cross-contamination. If you're working in a facility that holds food, you should have policies that reduce these risks. Focus on the time and temperature control, but do not forget about protecting the food from contamination. In some cases, you might be able to hold food without controlling its temperature, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's look at some guidelines for holding food. You should think about buffets that happen in restaurants. Food should be covered, or you should have installed sneeze guards to protect food from contaminants. Contaminants from people that are serving themselves, from just insects. It should be from air, any type of things that are floating around in the air. So that would be the best way to protect food, is by covering it. Now let's talk about temperature. You should hold TCS food at the correct temperatures. Hot foods must be 135 degrees or higher. Cold food should be 41 degrees or lower. ServSafe recommends that you check temperatures at least every 4 hours. I do think that it needs to be done before that, because by 4 hours you have lost your time to correct if there is any type of temperature abuse. But they say 4 hours. You should throw out food that is not kept at 41 degrees or lower after 4 hours. You should be checking the temperatures every 2 hours at least, to leave time for corrective action. Never use hot holding equipment such as like warming tables, chafing dishes, sternos, things of that nature, to reheat food unless it's designed for it. So in other words, you need to have the food hot before you put it in there, so that it's able just to keep it warm, but it is not going to be good enough to reheat the food correctly, and then it can be moved there. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few instances where you can hold food without temperature control. And most of the time that's like family gatherings, holiday dinners, or, backyard parties, birthday parties, things of that nature. If there's no electricity available to power, holding foods hot, then, you can get away with not doing that. However, there is a 4-hour limit, okay? Now, when you're looking at cold food, they give a 6-hour limit as long as the food doesn't reach 70 degrees. But when you think about it, most indoor temperatures are at least 70 degrees, even in the winter when it's cold outside. So you have to be super careful. They suggest that you keep the food in the fridge for 41 degrees or below, up right until you're ready to serve it, and then you should monitor that food and check the temperature to make sure it doesn't get above 70. But if it does, and if it's been out for more than 6 hours, it should get tossed. The biggest threat to food that is ready to be served is contamination. You should make sure that your serving staff is educated on how to keep food safe and when they're ready to be served. So to prevent contamination when serving food, you should at all costs avoid bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods. You should definitely be wearing single-use gloves. You should be using spatulas or tongs or deli sheets or other utensils to touch food that's ready to eat. You should also use clean and sanitized utensils for serving. No utensil should be used to double dip in different items. So you should have a separate utensil for each food. You should clean and sanitize it after each task. And if using them continuously, clean and sanitize them at least every 4 hours, because you will have residue and food sticking to the utensil. And if that is not sitting, which most of the time it's not, in the warming unit, then the food on the utensils will end up turning bad, and then you'll contaminate the dish when you put it in there to scoop something out. So please be cognizant of that and remember those details. Let's think about buffets and self-serving areas. They are so easily contaminated because when you think about it, you have dozens of people walking through these lines, touching the ends of the utensils, and serving themselves. So let's look how we can prevent contamination when you're using a self-serve line. Store serving utensils correctly between uses. They should leave them in the food with the handle extending above the container rim. That way, no food on the end of them, will stick to the end of there, will get a chance to go bad if you leave them in the heated food themselves. They should also be then placed on clean and sanitized food contact surfaces. So if you're, taking them out for some reason because you're changing a chafing dish out, you've run out of food and you need to put a new one in, then those utensils should come out. They should be put down on a clean and sanitized surface until you change out the chafing dish and then put them back in. Or have a new one and get that one cleaned. Now we're going to talk about service staff. So here's your waiters, your waitresses, the people that will be, handling the food and bringing it out to the customer. They need to be just as careful as your kitchen staff. So let's look at a couple of series of pictures here. Handling dishes or glassware. Obviously, the picture on the left is the correct way. In a rack, they're clean, they're sanitized, you're not touching them. If you're looking at the right side, you're looking at definitely contamination issues. They're touching them with their hands. It's under his chin. It's touching his clothes. Definitely incorrect. Now let's look at how to serve a plate on a table. If you're looking at the picture on the left, wait staff should always touch the bottom of a plate. They should not be touching the top surface where customers will be eating food off that surface. So you touch the bottom, you can touch the sides, in order to put it down so that you don't drop it, but never wrap your thumb around or stick your finger in the food or anything of that nature. You should not be touching the surface that people will be eating off of ever. The same goes for flatware or silverware. You should always be touching the silverware from the handle. You should never be touching the parts that go into a customer's mouth. If you have, when you're sending your dishes through the dishwasher, the handles should be sticking up when they come out and they get dried. And if you're wrapping your silverware, that's a good way to keep your silverware safe and clean, is to wrap it in either linen or paper napkins. But you would always just touch the handles, never the pieces that go into their mouth. Utensils should always be used on ready-to-eat foods. We already said that. So as you can see in the picture, handling a bagel, which is a ready-to-eat food, is a no-no. Bare hand handling is a no-no. So always use a utensil. It could be a deli sheet. It could be, tongs, whatever it is that you're using to handle ready-to-eat foods. Handling ice from an ice machine. You should always use the scooper. The scooper should be stored on the outside of the machine so you don't have to dig for it and touch and contaminate the ice. You should never use your hands, and you should never plunge a glass into the ice machine to serve up ice. Quick story that I have, I was in a restaurant once. I like to chew ice. I thought I had a piece of ice I was chewing on, and it turned out to be a piece of glass. So it was a physical contaminant, very serious, could have been dangerous, and either they broke a glass near the ice machine or they actually would, plunge glasses in to fill them up. All right, we're going to talk about what you can reserve to different customers. This is a pet peeve of mine. Condiments. Condiments should be served in their original containers or in containers that are designed to prevent contamination. So those ketchup bottles that sit out in a restaurant, those salt and pepper shakers where, bored kids have plenty of time to do some probably disgusting things to, those really should not be used. You should never reserve uncovered condiments. So if you're putting them in individual cups, that is really what they should be sent out in, individual cups, and then those cups get thrown away if the person used them or not. Okay, you should never reserve unused condiments or condiments that have been, left open. Okay, throw away opened portions or dishes of condiments after serving them to guests. Do not reserve food that is returned by one guest to another. You should never reserve uneaten bread to other guests. I actually worked in a restaurant who did that. They would take the unused rolls from the table and then they would cut them up and use them for croutons. I would argue with the owner of this restaurant every single shift I had. I told him I would not do it. I would throw those rolls away. But I'm sure the shifts I wasn't working, he probably did it to save a buck. But it's just definitely wrong. You should also change the linens in the bread baskets between guests. You should never be reserving something that has been out to another table to new guests. Plates that have garnishes on them, like a pickle maybe that wasn't eaten, or a fancy, piece of lettuce with orange, peels that are cut fancy. They should never be reused. Generally, only unopened packaged food in good condition can be reserved. So like squeezable condiment packets, if you wipe them down, wrapped crackers or pretzel sticks, if you wipe the packages down. Also, prevent time temperature abuse and contamination by never letting customers refill dirty plates or use dirty utensils at a self-service area. No customer should be bringing up a used plate. You always get clean and fresh. You should stock displays with the correct utensils for dispensing food. So have tongs, have ladles, have deli sheets, whatever it is that the customer needs in order to safely pick up that food product. And never use ice as an ingredient if it's been used to keep food or beverages cold, because they could be contaminated. And then last, let's talk about preventing time temperature abuse and contamination. We already recapping a little bit. We said use sneeze guards. You should also, in display cases, make sure that you're labeling items, foods. You don't want people to be like, take something and then they're like, oh, I didn't know it was that, and then put it back. So if they see the label, they know what it is, they're only taking what they want. So that prevents them from putting things back into a chafing dish that maybe they change their minds about. You should definitely hold foods at correct temperatures. Hot foods, 135 or above, and cold foods, 41 degrees or lower. That wraps up Chapter 7, and thank you. Make sure your notes are complete, and then you'll move on to Chapter 8.